It feels like now more than ever, an author's first book determines the rest of their career. Publishers are looking for these sexy debuts that make a lot of money. That could be a romantasy series that maybe blows up on TikTok, or some kind of sensational celebrity tell-all. But what is lost when it's sales and not art that's driving the books that get published? My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Tajja Isen is here. She wrote about this for the Walrus. Her article is called "The Publishing Industry Has a Gambling Problem." Jen Sookfong Lee is an author and editor at the Canadian indie publisher ECW Press. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Nice to have you here. This is a delight. Listen, Tajja, I'm going to start with you because you wrote the piece. So you talk to writers and you talk to editors and you talk to agents. You talk to everybody, and they said they all told you the same thing. They said there's a lot of pressure on a debut right now. So if your debut doesn't sell that well, what ends up happening to the rest of your career as a writer?
Yeah, if the debut isn't a blockbuster, if it sells modestly, it can be very, very difficult for writers to continue to progress in their career. There are any number of reasons why a book might not pop off. Maybe there's a small marketing budget, maybe there's editorial turnover. We've seen books coverage get kind of cut dramatically. Social media is who knows what's going on there. But if the book doesn't take off, it's the writer who has to carry that sort of stain as part of their record, and it becomes very difficult for them to sell a second book. They often sell it for much less money if they're able to sell it at all.
Jen, you are a writer, but also you're an editor. Does that feel true to you? Do you agree that there's a lot more pressure right now on a writer's first book?
I think there can be. I think that, it's like everything, like music or film. Everyone loves an ingenue. Everybody loves to discover something.
Did you just quote Taylor Swift? Because that's
Did I?
Yeah, you did. She says that on Nothing New, but this is neither here nor there. Anyway, continue.
Okay, I did it for you.
Thank you.
I do think it sets up like really unrealistic expectations that can really never be repeated, particularly with a sophomore book. Look, it happened to me. I lived it. And it also, it sets up this expectation not only for the publisher, but also for the author. You only get to be a debut author once. And then, you turn 49 and you're super crusty like me, and the intention is just not the same.
First of all, you are also, at this point, 13 books into your career? 13, 14 books into your career? So
Yeah.
we're way further along down the line here. That's the other thing that has changed. But Tajja, I guess we're talking about this idea because there's been maybe a shift in this. On the one hand, it makes sense that if your first book is not a success, it makes sense. They have a harder time selling the next one. It makes sense that, publishers are a little bit cautious to go, should we take a risk on this writer again? But you point out that this hasn't always been the case. Toni Morrison being a good sort of example of this. Do you want to talk about the story of her first novel?
Totally, yeah. So her first novel, The Bluest Eye, was very modestly published. The publisher didn't have kind of massive expectations for it. It sold maybe like 1,500, 2,000 copies, and a few years later actually went out of print. And at the time, Morrison was working in publishing, very strapped for cash. And she happened to be working in the same building as Robert Gottlieb, who later became, her editor. And he happened to have read the first novel, thought, hey, there's something to this writer. She's got some chops.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yeah, just a bit. And kept her in-house and published her second novel, published her third. And it was her third novel with the Song of Solomon where she really broke out. So it was because her editor was able to nurture her across books that, she had this incredible career that reshaped literature.
Jen, if this is true, right? If there's something shifting, right, about this idea that we're losing the ability to support writers to just keep working until they become better writers, what is going on in publishing and for publishers that is kind of maybe limiting their capacity to keep developing a writer's potential?
Well, there are a lot of things going on. Staff turnover is a big thing. I think when you lose an editor, that's a big thing for an author because they lose the person who is advocating for them. But I should say, the thing about it is I'm an acquisitions editor, and then acquisitions editors are usually financially responsible for the success of the book when it comes down to it. We're the ones who take a chance on somebody, which means then that at my job, I am at least partially responsible for the livelihoods of my colleagues, which is why I can't sleep at night.
You got to make choices that sell well so that the publisher can keep going.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's really, that's a lot of pressure. And then I would love to commit to every author that I work with because they're all great. They're all dreamboats. But at the end of the day, if the sales numbers are not there, how do you justify balancing committing to an author's career who you think might have another, book published somewhere else versus like the salaries of your friends at work. Like it's hard.
That
Yeah, for sure.
it's certainly not the kind of pressure that I would want to have waking up every day in the morning. You know, just like reading books, going, can this pay the mortgages of everyone who works here? That is a lot of pressure, right? That's a lot of pressure. The way that all of this is tracked, Tajja, you wrote about something called track, which is like publishing jargon for sales data. Publishers use track to determine, hey, okay, these are the books that are going to get published. These are the books that we're going to sort of take a chance on here. Why is this data less reliable than we think it is?
Yeah, so the software that is used for measuring track, for tracking sales data in the US is BookScan and Canada is BookNet. And both of them are kind of notoriously incomplete in terms of what they do track. Not every retailer reports their sales data to BookScan or BookNet. A writer might be selling books at an event and might, sell a bunch, but those aren't counted towards their sales data. So when publishers are considering whether or not to take on a writer's next project and they're looking at this incomplete sales data, they're not getting the whole picture. So if the sales aren't, if they're not jazzed by that number, it's, that's not quite, it's not a complete number. So
yeah, it sort of gives you like a, hey, this is part of the picture, but the idea that you take this as a full picture, maybe that's not a fair representation of how that book is doing.
Exactly, yeah.
I should also say, like, the other thing about Tajja's article is that you focus on the big five publishers in the United States. So you focus on S&S, Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Hachette, and Macmillan. Jen, as someone who works for an indie press here in Canada, it's got to be a different kind of picture. How does all of this sort of trickle down to your level in terms of where you're working?
Well, I think the most immediate thing in terms of like trickle down is that you do get authors that are cut loose by the big five coming to independent presses like ECW. Like we're a pretty big independent press, so we get a fair amount of like a former prize-winning author, gets into your inbox and you're like, whoa, this would not have happened 10 years ago. But the other thing is if you're taking on an established author who has books published with somewhere else, it means that it limits your ability to take the sort of like the weird and the new and the fantastic. And that is actually sort of the bottom line for so many independent publishers, to find that really exciting new voice. Like at ECW, one of our exciting new voices years ago was Wabgisha Grice with Moon of the Crusted Snow, which still pays my salary.
I was going to say, that's a banger.
Fantastic.
That's a banger and a hit. You know what I mean? Like, yes.
Yeah, and if that had happened and we had a bunch of like former prize-winning authors coming to ECW those years ago, would we have been able to take the chance on Wab's book? I don't know.
Yeah, but I guess like when we sort of frame it as this idea of like taking the chance, like that's what we're doing here, Tajja. Like this is, it's art. It is, of course, the commerce side of it matters, but there's this idea of like reading a book and saying, okay, this book is doing something that is interesting, that should be out in the world. Let's figure out how to support it. And Wabgisha Grice, like that's a perfect example of a book that, like, to me, I feel like every 6 months I see a different version, a different cover of it, Jen. So like you guys are doing a beautiful job sort of pushing that book, but there's something to be said because, Tajja, you spoke with Aliana Habib, a literary agent, and she said this trend of sort of expecting a lot on a debut book comes down harder on underrepresented communities. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that might be?
Yeah, so publishers are always trying to chase the hot new trend. That's sort of part of the gambling problem that I talk about in the piece. And, oftentimes if there's a particular identity group or form of marginality that's getting a lot of, airtime in the news, publishers will kind of hop on that trend and be like, oh, we need to buy up books from this community. And they aren't always, and this was Aaliyah's point, they might not be publishers who have published, writers from that background in meaningful ways before. They might not be best positioned to support them. And we saw this in 2020 with, publishers scrambling to gobble up books by Black writers with the, heightened visibility of the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of those books did very well. But a lot of them did not, because maybe the publisher didn't know how to position them. Maybe they didn't know how to make the books find their readers. And so Aaliyah's point was that it becomes very easy for publishers now, 5 years later, to say, oh, we tried that and it didn't work, just because their particular iteration of it didn't work.
Right, and just the idea of like, we tried that, didn't work, therefore that should be the end of that story. What a disheartening thing to sort of hear, right?
Yeah.
And I guess when you zoom out all the way out, Jen, this idea of publishers in the big five trying to sort of predict the next bestseller, what's the limitation of that approach? The idea that like you walk into an acquisitions meeting trying to go, hey, does this have the juice to become a bestseller? Is that the only way to measure what a book that gets acquired should be?
There's no sales data or any data in the world that can predict a bestseller. I should say that because it's usually the weirdest thing that becomes a hit and you never know.
Yeah.
But the thing about like sales data or like your profit and loss statements, the things that you use to like forecast a bestseller, like when you have someone, an author who is brand new, who comes from a marginalized or underrepresented community, who is writing something that's also brand new, there is no sales data that can even like match it. So like if I'm working on a book right now called Depression Cooking by Sonali Menezes, which is a comic, but it's also recipes and it's also food memoir. Where on earth am I going to find comparable titles to try to forecast how that book is going to sell?
Yeah.
But that's why I want it, though, right? Too,
Right.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, because you're like, I haven't seen something like this.
Exactly.
So therefore, it's not reliable that it's going to be a hit, but it's doing something interesting in the world.
Exactly, yes.
But before I let both of you go, I just want to ask you about another book story that is, I think, clearly sort of related to this, right? Which is like the chair of the Booker Prize, Roddy Doyle, big name in literary fiction. He recently said on stage that of the 153 submissions for the Booker Prize this year, most were, quote, a waste of time. I met Roddy last year at the Vancouver Writers Festival. It's just so incredibly funny to think of his face delivering the statement. It's just an incredibly funny idea. But Tajja, people took this as a sort of a State of the Union on literature kind of comment. What did you think? Like, are there too many bad novels being published right now? Does that feel true to you?
I mean, I think there are probably too many books, period, being published right now. Like, there's something like
Wow.
50,000 books published a year in the US.
That's a lot of books.
And that's a lot of books. And it's like, it's really hard it's impossible that all of them would get the airtime that they deserve and get the attention that they deserve. So while I don't, entirely agree with what Roddy Doyle said, I appreciate that he is bringing the conversation back to literary quality because, I think what gets lost in the churn of like, will this sell? Does this person have a platform? Will this go off on TikTok?
Yeah.
Is the book good? And I appreciate that he brought that back to the center of the conversation.
Jen, I have to imagine you're sitting there trying to sort of figure out what next book to acquire. I'm going like, Roddy told me there's too many bad books. I got to, but how do his comments sort of like land with you?
I was the jury chair at the Carol Shields Prize for Fiction 2 years ago, and I would say that I would never have gotten away with saying any of that. I'm not Roddy Doyle.
Sure. Not
but
yet.
I should say,
Not yet, you aren't.
2 years from now, I'm going to log on. It's going to be Roddy's face. That's just the way it's going to go.
Yeah.
I would say that I do think it does show a bit of elitism when it comes to genre, and particularly authors who are playing with spec or romantasy or anything that is of these different genres. And to me, the question is not about whether the literary quality is worse or better. The question is, how can we interrogate the way people read genre fiction, the ways people read literary fiction, and maybe open up our minds to that a little bit? That's what I would say. If Roddy was sitting with me right now, that's what I would say to him.
I wish he was sitting with you right now so you could tell him that directly to his face. Before I let both of you go, okay, maybe I'm looking for like a recommendation of like something that you're excited about that's about to come out. Tajja, do you want to start with you? What are you reading? What are you excited for the world to read?
I am excited for the world to read The 10-Year Affair by Erin Summers. It is set in New York's Hudson Valley. Cora takes her child to baby group, this very bougie baby group, and meets this guy, Sam. They're married to other people. They have this instant attraction. And then the novel splits into two timelines, one where they pursue that attraction, one where they don't. Super sharp and funny and explores parenting and regret and millennial aging and how our lives never really turn out the way we expect them to. And it's beautiful. And I highly recommend it.
I've been waiting for that book for months because Brendan Taylor's been tweeting about being like, you guys are not ready for when this book finally comes out. I was like, fine, I will wait until it finally arrives. So I'm glad that it's out in the world now. Jen, last word to you, pal. What should people be reading right now?
Okay, this book actually came out in the summer, so it's out. And it's Murderland by Carolyn Fraser about the serial killers of the Pacific Northwest, which is a totally different kind of book. But if you're interested in Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer and possibly that lead poisoning might have led to their psychopathy, pick it up. I read it on vacation and I couldn't put it down on a beach.
Jen, the books that you take to a beach and the books that I take to a beach are a little bit different, I think. I think our beach read definitions might be slightly different here.
Yeah, mayhem is my thing.
Love it.
Mayhem is your thing. You guys are a delight and I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much for your time, you guys.
Thanks,
for having
Elamin.
us.
Yes, of course. Good to see you. Tajja Isen is the author of the book Some of My Best Friends. You can read her article, The Publishing Industry Has a Gambling Problem, in The Walrus. Jen Sookfong Lee is an editor at ECW Press, and she just released her latest novel, The Hunger We Pass Down.